Daredevil episode 4, In the Blood. Definitely a great episode. It was cool that the beginning of it was actually a pretty interesting focus on the Russian set. I believe it was 8 years ago when they were locked up in this crazy prison for whatever reason. And we learned through like some of the dialogue in this episode, like one line in particular, that they actually used to be like princes. It may not have exactly been like, they were actual princes of Moscow, but they had money. They were wealthy and well known, and for whatever reason, they ended up in this prison with a bunch of their friends, like the two kind of main Russians that we know from the series. They end up in this prison, and then they're the ones who end up escaping through a pretty gruesome tactic of using their dead friend's rib cage to create knives and escape. And so, that establishes the fact that this episode is going to focus on them, at least somewhat. It didn't focus on them nearly as much as I thought it would. It obviously starts off that way, though, because of the way the episode ends and how crucial it is to kind of focus on them at least a little bit in this episode. So it's definitely fun to get kind of the one side of the things that really has come up, because Daredevil, when he goes out, he's really been dealing with them mostly because they're the ones sort of out there. Like everyone else, like the woman who has the sort of cocaine warehouse, nothing big is happening there. It's just they're there and they're doing the cocaine. So unless one of the Russians who does something like extravagant, like trying to kidnap a kid, or they taking these women to put into like a prostitution ring, unless they do something very outward, then no one else is no one else is involved, like in any way, shape, or form. It's really, as far as he sees, it's kind of just the Russians, and he knows obviously Fisk, but that's pretty much it. It's the Russians, and that's all we get out of them. And out of like the criminal organization that Fisk runs in general, it's the Russians and the stuff they're doing, because it's like typical gang stuff that you see all the time. So they encounter Daredevil all the time. But it was a nice focus on them. For parts that focus on them were interesting, because we got to learn a little bit more about some of the mainstay villains. And of course, they established like, okay, well, because they've kind of failed due to Daredevil, Fisk wants to come in and kind of take things over a little bit, because they aren't really doing things 100%. So he wants to come in and give them assistance, get a bit more of the profits than he's normally getting. And the two brothers have, they kind of have a disagreement on things. It's like one guy wants to do it, the other guy doesn't. And they have this split, and eventually by the end, they both decide, yeah, well, obviously we're screwed. Like, we took a big step forward because they had Claire in this episode, and she was actually found. They did end up kidnapping her, and it's like they took a big step forward towards dealing with Daredevil. And then of course he comes to the shop and he just whoops all these people up, and they take off. And that was also an interesting scene. We saw Claire take the metal bat to the last guy's face, the one who was kind of torturing her the entire time. And that was a pretty big deal for her character, because she's obviously a nurse, so it's really the opposite. Like, her hitting this guy in the head, it's the opposite of what she does when she's normally helping people. And after she did that, which was clearly out of sheer just amped up adrenaline, after she did that, she kind of just burst into tears, because it's not something that she's used to. It's not something she wants to be involved in. So it was definitely fun to experience that for her character, this sort of small development. I don't want to say it's not going to come up later, but it was sort of, it seemed like it could just be in the moment, and she'll be able to deal with a little bit later, because she didn't exactly kill anyone. She just hit the guy and knocked him out. So if it was like a death and she had to save Daredevil, then I think it would be a bit different. I would definitely expect that to come up maybe throughout the rest of this season. But considering it was just like, oh, she knocked the guy out, it could just be this episode. It could still come up in the next episode, because she was kidnapped, so I'm sure that'll come up in the next episode, and that'll kind of just go along with it. Like, yeah, and the final guy that you had, you had a gun to my head, you stopped him, or you were about to break his arm and stuff, and then I just, right across his face with the metal bat, which he was, threatening her with over and over again. So, that was an interesting little scene that they had with her character, and it'll be cool to see how she develops and how things really change between them, because that did ultimately lead to Matt telling her his real name, and he even took her to his house. So a huge leap forward for their relationship. And then it was a hugely, backwards in a sense for the Russians, because of course with them having this split, when they decide, all right, let's make this deal so we can get help and at least have a business, things kind of get screwed up. And of course, like the whole time, I think I was in sort of the typical TV sense. It's like, well, the guy who doesn't want to do it is obviously going to be the one who ends up dying, because he's going to cause too many issues and he's going to really confront Fisk, and that's going to be the problem. And it turns out to be the guy who wanted to make the deal the entire time, because he interrupted Fisk during a very serious moment for his character. And it was great getting to see Fisk in this episode too. Like, we got introduced to him, and they did not waste any time giving us like a full-on look at his character. We got to see the date that he had with Vanessa, which I thought was great because of the fact that they focused on it. We got to learn a little bit about him, like when he was a kid and how he felt growing up, and we had to see more of his personality. And he is an awkward character. They made him an awkward character, which I think is very interesting. And he seems like he's socially awkward, and he doesn't, he's not exactly up to the typical standards where people are like, hey, how's it going and stuff like that. Especially in the business that he runs, it could be from his childhood, it could just be how he is in general. But it was interesting to see him go on this date, and Vanessa's kind of dealing with him like, hey, I can tell that you don't typically do this, and just the way he would speak and stuff like that. And they gave a clear signal. I don't know what it meant when he would like mess with his cufflink and stuff like that, but it was like a clear giveaway that he had something on his mind. I couldn't really pick up what emotion, because when he first did it, it was when he asked Vanessa out, and she was like, she was the only one working, and he kind of did it, and he was like, okay, and he was like, maybe another time, and he was going to walk off. But the second time he did it, they were actually on the date, so it was kind of interesting how he did that. And it was like, he can't be like disappointed or upset or anything, because they're on the date. So it was like, in one case it seemed like that's what he does when he goes for something really big and doesn't get it. And it's not like, an angry thing like at the end of the episode. It's just like, oh, that's kind of upsetting. And that's kind of his takeaway. Is like, that's just, for whatever reason, that's kind of his relapse sort of key, where that's how he gets out of that sort of saddened state. But when he did it at the date, it was like, well, now I'm not exactly sure what emotion to attach it to. So it's something that I'm curious to see if they explain it, and maybe it belonged to someone or something like that, because it seemed like it was only the one arm, it wasn't on the other arm. So it could just be the one cufflink that he has, and he got it from someone else, or maybe it's just sentimental value. I don't know, but I feel like that'll have an explanation to it. Just like, that's kind of his tick. That's what it is. That was kind of the term I was looking for. But it's not a nervous tick, and it's not a sad tick. So it's just like various emotions, I guess, are kind of revolved around this. And when he's uncomfortable, sad, maybe nervous as well, it's, all those things. That's kind of his, escape, his mental escape, to kind of get things back to normal. But it was a great look at his character, to get to see him try to, go on a date with this woman that he found very attractive, that he thought was really nice and stuff. And then things kind of go south when one of his business partners comes in. And I love that scene, because at first I thought it was going to be simple. Like, he comes in, and it's like, you interrupted this date, and he was going to be mad. But he comes in, and he brushes past the second in command, who I seriously don't think they've said his name yet. Like, I could easily be wrong, because I forget people's names left and right. But, he brushes past him, and then, like, I have to say, it had just been like 8 separate people stood up, and that wasn't even remotely on my mind. Like, he probably has people all over this restaurant. I didn't think that for 1 second. Like, people don't even, like, the heads are the only people that even really know the guy's name. And it was just kind of funny. It was like all these people stood up, and I was like, wow, I didn't even think about that as a possibility, that he'd have this entire place bought out and have like, hey, you come in at this time, you come in like an hour ahead of us, half an hour, 45 minutes, just like in 15-minute little increments and all that stuff. And, they all get up, and it's like, what the heck's going on? So, of course, that ruins things, and he kind of loses Vanessa temporarily, because he did say, if you say that, you didn't have a good time at all, then I promise you'll never see me again. And, of course, she doesn't say that, so it does leave, it leaves things open a little bit. He still has an opportunity to, date her again. I'm sure maybe in the middle of the season or towards the end of the season. I guess with episode 4, I believe there are only 12 episodes, so 6 would be the middle. But maybe a little bit, more towards the end, he'll get the opportunity to kind of date her again. Maybe even not until season 2. But she didn't exactly say she didn't have a good time, so they left the door open, and I guess that's a perfect segue to the end of the episode, where we really see Fisk lose it. And I mean, I did not expect them to go that far with it. Like, he beats the guy up. I thought he was gonna beat him up, and that was gonna be it. I knew he was. The first thought was, as soon as he ruined the day, I was like, yeah, he's gonna kill this guy. But once they were actually, I can't say fighting. Well, I guess they were fighting. He fought back. So once they were actually fighting, it's like, okay, maybe he'll beat him up a lot, and that'll be it. And it was like, alright, so he took him down and stuff. I'm like, okay. And then he sat him up against the car, and I was like, oh, now it's going to go really far. And, I thought it was going to be like a typical TV thing where it's like, okay, well, now it's going to go really far, but it's still just going to be he's, bashing his head and it'll kill him. I knew that. But the last thing I expected was for them to do it where it's like he's doing it, with, Fisk strength, and he just literally bashes the guy's head off, and the body just falls, and there's nothing there, and there's just blood pouring. And that was just a crazy scene. It was like, this is insane. Like, I did not expect them to go that far. I know they took it to crazy levels in the last episode as well, but this one was just like, it was at a comic book level. It wasn't like at a comic book level where it seems like just ridiculous, but those types of things do happen. There are those, it's comic books, especially in the Marvel universe. You have people who have just inhuman strength, so they can do these crazy things. And it was crazy to see. And now there's going to be this all-out war. At least, the Russians are going to be going against Fisk, and I would assume everyone else, because as they kind of mentioned in the episode, everyone kind of talks behind the Russians' backs about how they can't get things done. Although they're the only ones who even have to deal with Daredevil, which I feel like, obviously it's an illegal business. Nobody gives a crap about anyone else. It's just like, you can't do it, so you suck. And that's kind of how they're dealing with it. Now, like, this guy obviously has some insane skills. And that's something that I find kind of interesting. Like, they talk about how Daredevil is human and this and that. But how do they even know that? Like, they assume he's human because they can beat him up. But considering what he can do, you think they mentioned, I believe in the first episode, they talk about like the stuff that happened with the Avengers. I feel like the enemies in this show, I feel like they kind of missed an opportunity not having some of their dialogue be like, what if he is one of these crazy superhumans? Like, the one guy mentioned it, the older guy, but he was just randomly saying like, well, because we lose, that's kind of all there is to it, and that's it. But for everyone else, it's just like, yeah, this human, he's only human. Why are you guys getting beat up? It's like everybody that lives, which is everybody, because Daredevil doesn't kill anybody. Nobody's saying like, this guy freaking dodged bullets. Like, nobody's saying that, or how he's doing all these flips and spins and dodging left and right. And they get kicks and punches in, but it's like no one seems to even contemplate maybe he is actually superhuman, and it's just kind of, it seems to blow over everybody's head, which I think is just kind of funny and weird for the characters, where they just don't seem to mention it like at all. But I don't know what to expect for the next episode, but it should definitely be insane. Obviously the Russians were the ones who had the biggest issues to begin with. Now that the one guy who didn't want to make the deal is the only one left alive, obviously there's going to be all-out war and like an insane conflict. But I'm excited to see that. I don't want to skip over this because this is also a huge part of the episode, but Karen and Ben kind of officially deciding to team up, I thought was great. And Karen kind of explaining things to Ben, like, this is what I know, maybe this is happening or that's happening. And Ben's like, you should walk away from this, because he wants to protect her, because he's seen a lot of people that helped him get killed in the past. And they have the auction scene, and she's, going in. I'm like, I thought that was kind of cool. Like, she's kind of doing her spy thing, and she's looking at people. I thought she would just write their numbers down and, be like, all right, this person, that person. Although drawing their faces makes way more sense, because just writing a number, that could have been anyone. But when Ben shows up, and it's like, these two people, I don't know who they are, but they're not voting either. I thought that was just a cool moment, and then when they talk at the diner, he's like, I told you to step away from it. I never said I wasn't interested. So I thought that was cool, and his first step for her was like sign the agreement, which will get her some money, which technically she kind of has to pay back to the company because of her having to vote and everything like that. But it's going to protect her because they're going to assume she's not going to be doing anything. She signed this agreement. We could just send her to prison where we kill everybody. So, it'll kind of stop them from coming after her or even thinking that she might do something. And then she can kind of work behind the scenes without having to be so scared or, have to be so incredibly careful because she'll sign the agreement and they'll think everything's great. So, I can't wait to see how that stuff plays out. Everything that happened with Claire, I think was very interesting in this episode. I'm excited to see, the next couple of steps and how they advance their relationship. Because I don't know if she's going to become like the actual love interest or anything, but it seems like that that would definitely be the typical way for things to go between them. She's the woman who saved the random superhero in the dumpster, which is a weird sentence, but she saved him and then he saved her in this episode, and he trusts her enough to take her to his apartment and say his real name and everything. So it could easily go that route. I don't think it would be bad if it did. I don't think it would just suddenly get super sappy. If anything, that might just make it an even crazier show because it seems like everyone just like they don't mess around when it comes to violence on this show. So it could make it even more dangerous if he falls in love with her and then has to protect her and then he kind of goes a step too far maybe. But I have to wait and see. Definitely loved the episode. Getting to see Fisk, advance in this episode, get a bit of story progression and backstory and detail on his character, and then just completely lose it in the end of the episode was definitely something. And I'm really excited for this all-out war. But of course, I want to know what you guys thought about this episode. So please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts, least favorite parts, and what do you guys think of Fisk having an actual episode now. Like, this was his first full episode, and it seemed like it focused, admittedly to me, it seemed like it focused a lot more on him even than it did the Russians. Like every storyline really kind of plays into each other, but it seemed like there was a lot more focus on Fisk than I was actually expecting with the initial opening of the two Russian guys surviving, in the past. But I obviously loved it. More development on him. His first insane freak out moment. I'm sure we'll have plenty more of those. But I thought it was great, and I want to know what you guys thought about it. So please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.